Hi, my name is Rob Mackey. I'm a graduate of the University of Gloucestershire. I graduated this year with a fine art degree. And through most of my university days, I've worked with found objects, odd objects, things that you might not necessarily consider relevant to the art world. I've scoured hedgerows, I look in skips, I go to scrap merchants, just looking for materials that can be refashioned in a new way to create something that might challenge. Um, but towards the end of my university course, I came across these lovely little things, emergency blankets. Um, it was by pure chance, really, that I found these wonderful, multifaceted little mirrored surfaces. And I've gone on to paint on them. I've gone on to paint and yet leave gaps that would allow me to interact with the painting because they borrow the colour that is around them. If I put this over my back, you can see already the mirrors are borrowing the color from a t-shirt, and when you have vibrant colors around, it is just absolutely amazing what you can do with them. And so I plan to use these. They're really quite pertinent in just the whole project that we're doing, because all along, Emily, Ali, and I, we've talked about the current situation we find ourselves in, and the whole idea of survival um, is very, very important. And we both, well, not both, but the three of us suggest that much of our survival and well-being comes about through artistic endeavour. However, one other thing that I'm currently very involved with are some little miniature galleries. Um, they all came about when I found myself losing my studio space in March. It shut down, and I generally work big. Um, and all of a sudden, confined to a dining room table, um, you can't do much on a dining room table. And so I toyed with the idea and came up with the idea of illusion of big. Um, and so, Amazon, please, can I buy some tiny little figures? And this I did. And well, to me, it's very interesting that these particular pieces of work are some paintings that somebody that I know in Cheltenham, they were paintings done by this person's uncle, an 84-year-old man who'd just taken up painting. And she'd seen some of the miniature galleries that I created for care homes, a sort of postcard art project. And she said, can you do the same for my uncle's paintings? So she sent photographs along. I shrunk and manipulated the images, built the gallery as you see it, took some photographs, and then sent them off to the uncle in Nottingham. And I also upload all my miniature galleries to a couple of gallery sites on Instagram that I call the Howard Gallery and the Howard Street Gallery. And basically, I used to live in Howard Street. And I've also, one of them I dedicate to the artistic work of fellow graduates, and one to the postcard art, of people in care homes. Our last post in this project will in fact be the St Ives Court Gallery, where I'm going to take all the work that Ali, the Wilson's Art Collective, and Emily have created, and actually manipulate it and put it into the St Ives Court Gallery and broadcast it to the world. Going forward, I have no idea what my artistic career will be, but it will certainly be one of enthusiasm and pushing a few boundaries and hopefully not ruffling too many feathers.
Hi, I'm Emily Lawler and I'm a mosaic artist, and I'm in my studio now, so I'm going to talk to you about what I do by giving you a tour. So I'm going to take you with me now over to my sort of little area where you can see things on the wall. Whoop, sorry about that little interim. Right, here we go. So these are my mosaics, or a selection of the kind of thing that I do, and I work with vintage china, and I largely make birds, which I'll talk about in a moment. I do all sorts of things, but birds are my sort of fascination, really. And the very strange thing is, you'll see I've got some lovely china here which I've collected. I've now started to fish out some really beautiful pieces of china and save them from the hammer, and starting to collect a bit of china as I go. But the background to my sort of journey to get to where I was is quite funny, because I started my working life at the National Trust, and I worked with the ceramics conservator, and we used to go around the houses together to look at all the ceramics that needed conserving. And I actually went off to train as a ceramics conservator. I was headed for Camberwell College of Art, but you had to do a foundation first. And when I did the foundation, I got much more interested in design, and particularly stained glass. So I went off to do a degree where, in a way, I'm a bit of a jack of all trades, because it was a degree art for architecture. So it was materials that were integral to buildings. So I did ceramics and mosaics and stained glass, but it's the mosaics that I love. And it's funny, having sort of started off with the idea of ceramics conservation, I'm now working with old china and recycling it into something else. So these birds are, I do a mixture of birds at the moment. I make swans and swallows, and I've also just started making blue tits, which came out of the lockdown. I think you can see the blue tit there, and that was really because my studio's in the garden, and I was just, during the lockdown, really in awe of all the bird life. And I don't know if you can see the sort of gold luster on the wings. I use a lot of gold to just try and capture that idea of the sort of shimmering wings. And they're based really on fairy tales as well. I was brought up with a lot of Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale type stories, and swallows feature in those stories, and so does the swan. This is from an exhibition where I made a flock of 11 wild swans, which reflected that story, the 11 princes turning into swans. So I try and get a little bit of fairy tale in there. This piece is something I experimented with, which is a mixture of raku, which is the thing that I'm interested in. I don't throw pots or make anything three-dimensional. I sort of work in, I would say, possibly 2.5 dimension. Take you a bit closer there. I imprint all sorts of things into the raku, and I make tiles. So those tiles are then incorporated into vintage china and smalty. You can see the smalty, that's the glass, the coloured glass, which is an Italian kind of glass, which I don't often use, but it's very, very rich. You can see the gold in there. And smalty is what all the Byzantine mosaics that you'd find in Ravenna and Venice, that would be made out of that. I've also got a little taxidermied swallow there. That's my muse. So that's the kind of work that I do. And I'm just going to take you around my china store, which is quite considerable. I've got some more china arriving this week. And I just absolutely love finding new bits of china and things that would sort of make a good feather or a good beak. You'll see over here I've got duck colours, swan colours, swallow throats, duck heads, everything, every little piece I save, because you never know where it'll fit into a bird. I've got some beautiful turquoises and pale blues here for the swallows. So I started off with sort of working with quite a lot of blue and white, the sort of traditional willow pattern, but now all the birds are really sort of fantastical. So I've also got all the cups up here. You can see I don't use the cups because they're the wrong shape, but I really love them. So I decided to deck out the ceiling of my studio with vintage cups. So I'll just show you, I've just made, these are ready for grouting. I've made, this is for a customer who wanted me to make Beswick ducks, like the 1950s flying ducks that Vera Duckworth had in Coronation Street, which have become very iconic now. They were really quite naff, but now they're quite retro. So this is a set of mosaic Beswick ducks, and you can see, just take you down to the detail here. You can see, as I say, these are waiting to be grouted, but where I've got the sort of little details of the leaves that will make up the feathers on the birds. So those are heading out next week, but they've been really fun to make. And then this is my gold china. So this is like my treasure trove, sort of all sorts of gold to go on the feathers. And this is a swan in progress. You can just see, you can see the gold sources that I'm working with and the luster on the swan. And I've got this lovely sort of work table, which is actually a sewing table. That's a little flash of my sketchbook there. I'm just working on a new design for the winter. And I'll just take you back. So this ampersand, which it's really big, actually. I decided I want to go large. And the reason I mention the ampersand is that I've got a real love for words and letters. And several years ago, I was very ill, and it took me about a year to recover. And I was asked to make a piece for an exhibition for the following summer, and I decided to make this mosaic as part of my road to recovery. So the ampersand took a very long time to make, but it was very much my road to recovery. It's based on poetry about flowers and 18th century French knot garden. So that's the sort of the knot garden design with the poetry in it, and it's got vintage china and all sorts of things in it. But there's something about mosaics which is very consuming, and it gets you into the flow, what they call the flow, where you can really forget about your aches and pains or your worries and just think about where the next piece fits in. And where I met Rob, actually, at the hospice, we worked in the art therapy room together. The patients who worked with mosaics, who I've been in touch with since lockdown, have said mosaics have been an absolute lifeline in terms of being isolated and having a creative project to really kind of get stuck into and get them through it. So I personally think that mosaics, I mean, they're just great in so many ways, but they are very particularly good for that sort of sense of well-being and getting sort of stuck into something that's going to be a diversion. So I think that's it on the tour. That's it, my little garden studio looking out into the garden. So there we are. I think that's all I need to tell you.
May I ask you a question, Emily?
Sorry?
May I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
You said in your ampersand that you've got French poetry, and you showed us some of the text. How did you get the text onto the tiles?
Oh yes, well, I made some ceramic. I got some ceramic decals made up as transfers by a company, and they sent them through, and then I fired them onto tiles, and then I clipped the tiles, and that was something I'd really like to do more of. I feel I never got time to sort of pursue it, but I feel that sort of gives you a huge range then of you know, you can do anything. Loads of I've got my logo in decal transfer onto tiles, so I can put my logo into my mosaics as well as a tile. So yeah, it's a good way to do it.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Emily, I know this is maybe a very basic question. I was really I love your work. I've always loved your work. I think China
Thank you.
Mosaics is a fantastic place. But I was more interested in looking at your shelves and looking at your stocks. There seems to me
Yeah.
to be ever such a lot of certain ones, and it's not that you've just gone out and bought a dinner service in a second-hand shop. Where do you
Mm.
get your stuff from?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, so basically, I've really found it really hard during lockdown to source the china, because normally I would go out to car boot sales, charity shops, auction rooms, um, and just forage, and you know, the sort of basements of antiques and collectibles places where they just have loads of china, and I'll immediately see what would make a good sort of mosaic.
Mm.
But I haven't been able to do that, being shielding for 7 months really. I've got somebody who sources it for me, but she knows what I'm looking for. But there's some that are sort of, generally you can normally find them, which are things like the Spode gardenware, which is a really pretty just going to show you, see if I can show you a bit of Spode gardenware. So the Spode gardenware is this, what that wing's made of. It's a it's actually, here I've got a plate of it. That's it, and that's very common. I mean, it's a sort of beautiful. It's not cheap, but you can get a lot of it. So I've got quite a lot of that, which I've just collected over the years. And then of course the blue willow pattern, that's quite readily available. But yeah, I mean, this represents probably about 10 years worth of collection that keeps coming in. Yellows are almost impossible to get. So for my blue tits, I'm always searching for yellows. I've got some tiny little yellow flowers in here, but they're very, very hard to come by. So yeah, it's just getting the bits and pieces when I can, really.
It's interesting. I was reasonably friendly with a student at the university 2 years ago who used to go and stand in the canal and the river that runs down through Brimscombe, and she just used to forage in the mud to actually collect all the china that would just get thrown out and broken, maybe coming off a barge or something when it was a functioning canal, but from just all the buildings round about. And it was amazing, the stuff that she used to scrub clean, and it's sort of just like that blue stuff you showed me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because I've got a friend who does mudlarking in the River Thames and finds the most beautiful china there. I'd like to join her once. But yeah, people used to just chuck their china in. When we were at the hospice, one of the members of staff there had a Victorian midden in her garden by her rhubarb patch. So every time she dug up near the rhubarb patch, she would just bring in a bucket of old fragments of Victorian china, which was really lovely. And one of the patients actually made a mosaic with that. So yeah, if I had access to that, I mean, for example, on the beaches up in Scotland, that you can often find lovely bits of china, but that would be few and far between, really. But funnily enough, talking of throwing away china, this is something I find really fascinating. And again, back to my roots, interested in ceramics conservation. This piece has been riveted together.
Yeah.
And I find that absolutely fascinating, that you are able to effectively staple ceramic together. And I was reading about, so a lot of the National Trust ceramics are riveted together, but I was reading about it, and because obviously these pieces were very, very precious to families, that they found a way of riveting them together because they didn't want to throw them away. So yeah, I've got a few riveted pieces that I just sort of collected out of interest.
Mm. The riveting, I'm led to believe, had its roots in a shogun in China who wanted a big pot that was very, very precious repaired. And that when it came back, it wasn't sort of as he wanted it, and that was just about the initiating of the Japanese idea of kintsugi, where they
Oh
have all
yes.
the gold seams. And I just love the fact that, you know, you're celebrating the vessel there. You're not trying to hide the cracks. That's part of its life. And in some respects, that's a metaphor for life for all of us.
I think it is, absolutely. I think it's sort of the scars of what's gone before and sort of what's healed. And I thought about that a lot when I was in my recovery and making the mosaic. And I think that's very true. I really like kintsugi. I'd like to try it. But also the vintage china, it's never perfect. It's quite often discoloured. You know, the gold will quite often have a little bit missing, or and I find that really more interesting because nothing, you know, it's not perfect. It's had a history.
Mm. And it's interesting what you say about just losing yourself in the mosaics. When I
Yes.
worked with you up at Leckhampton, I can remember there was a lady there who actually made 6 leaves because she had
Yes.
6 children, and to come in each week and just sit with her, and she'd lose herself in that activity. And I think I did myself, as we just searched among all
Yeah.
the broken pieces, and a
It
very
is.
therapeutic activity.
That's really interesting. It is. I think there is something about that sort of broken pieces putting something back together again. There's something quite profound about it. It works on lots of different levels, and I think with the old china, I feel I love all the history bound up in. Originally when I was making mosaics, it was all about sort of cups of tea and those sort of domestic moments, you know, that we all sort of, that bind us together, drinking tea together, and like what Ali was saying about needing other people and needing to collaborate, needing each other, and how we're such social beings, and that sort of like thing about the ritual of drinking tea together and being together. So I love that sort of passing through my hands as I make the birds. So yeah.
Well, you say about Scottish beaches. Next Friday, I'm flying up to Skye for a week to trudge the beaches with my son and daughter-in-law to be. So if I find anything, I'll
Yes,
bring them
please
back, even
bring
although
them
it's
back.
tiny, that it can go in a special piece.
Yeah,
And
that would be really
my
nice.
last comment, sorry, Ali, I seem to be taking over here. The gold that you're using on that last bird's wings were just amazing. And I strongly approve of the the Duckworth. It
Oh,
wasn't.
the Beswick ducks, the 3 flying ducks.
Yes, it was. It wasn't Duckworth. It
Vera
was.
Duckworth, wasn't it? Vera Duckworth, was
No,
that
it
not her name?
was. No. Oh, I can't remember.
Hilda Ogden.
Pardon?
Sorry.
Hilda Ogden.
Hilda Ogden.
Oh yes, you're right. Sorry, Ali. It was Hilda Ogden. Yes,
So,
yes.
so
You're showing
yeah.
your age now.
Isn't it amazing that they've turned round from what they once were to the beautiful things that you're creating?
Well, it's funny that they were sort of, yeah, they're sort of kitsch, aren't they? You know, and it's just a reinterpretation. It's quite fun to reinterpret something to find the right sort of china to do that. So.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Ali Goff. I'm a mature fine arts student at the University of Gloucestershire and part of the 3 of us collaboration. Here this morning to talk to you about my practice. We're in my studio, which is based in my home in St Paul's. It's a converted bedroom, now turned into sort of a junk room. And my art practice really evolves around the circle of life. I look at human experiences, human emotions, how they affect me personally, and then how I portray them through my different artworks. I work in mixed mediums, very many different materials, and I try to find a synergy with the materials I use to the emotion and the outcome piece of art that I'm trying to portray. So I like sort of tactile, malleable sort of materials. I combine different materials, but I also embrace the transition and metamorphosis of these materials. So I like to use things like clay and glass and wire that will actually change and become a different nature. And it's an unpredictable outcome. And that's what I look for in the materials. I quite like that unpredictability. So recently, a recurrent theme throughout my work has been birth and death, nature and nurture. And these recurrent themes seem to manifest themselves in many different ways. In the first year, I was looking at cocoons and shelter and security, things like that. And in the second year, I've now moved on to sort of birthing, the female form, the degeneration of the body through aging. So it's quite diverse, but there is a sort of recurrent theme running through the work. I tend to use household items as well as clay and glass, things like cotton and wool, fabric, sometimes leaves. So it's really sort of what I can find to hand and what inspires me at that particular time. Of late, I've been doing quite a bit of sculpting, working in 3D, making plaster, papier-mâché and ceramic sculptures. And a lot of these seem to take on a sort of a female persona and a form. During the lockdown situation, I have been in isolation for my own well-being, but obviously in line with the government guidelines as well. And having spent a lot of time alone, I've used my art really to keep me sane, keep me busy, keep me occupied, but also to use it as an outlet to, I don't know, illustrate the emotions and the feelings and experiences that I've encountered. And so a lot of my work is actually starting to portray that with sort of figures that are enwrapped and protected, or they're secure, they're excluded, they're just kind of locked down and protecting themselves from an unknown entity, which is it's sort of a bit like the situation that we've been in over the last 7 months. Artists that I feel have influenced me are probably people like Louise Bourgeois and Jean Dubuffet, because they're known as sort of outsider art, and their art tends to be, initially you look at it and think it's a little childlike or primitive, but actually it runs quite deep, and the work that they portray is quite visceral and gritty and true to life, and it's actually quite emotional. And I think that's really the basis of my work. It's emotionally driven. In addition to that, my work's quite experimental as well, because I'll grab an idea and try it, and then I'll try it in 2 or 3 or 4 different materials to sort of just really stretch the idea and see where I can go with it. A recent example of that has been this beautiful lady. I don't know if you can see her here. This is my Olympia. And she's a statue of a female form reclining in a sort of seductive manner. But I then painted her dark green, wrapped her in copper wire and put her on a slate in my garden for 3 months. And so she's been out in the elements, and obviously the copper has now taken on a lovely green form as it's degraded and oxidized. And she looks quite different from the original sort of classical white alabaster classical female forms that you would imagine as a sculpture. So I quite like that she's taken on her own form. So in conjunction with all of these work that I do in my practice in my studio, I also get involved with a lot of community arts, and I've volunteered for quite a lot of art collaborations. I worked back in 2017 with an art group called Drawing Connections. They were based at the Spring Hill prison in Oxfordshire, open prison, and we would attend once a week to work alongside the prisoners, making different creative things. We did creative writing, collage, printing, etc. And after the 6 weeks were up, we held an exhibition in the visitor centre for all the friends and family and dignitaries to come along and see what we'd achieved. The project was lottery funded and run by Cambridge University, and it was quite successful, and I think they're now going to trial and pilot this scheme in other prisons around the country. So that was quite a nice project to be involved with. Following on from that, I got involved with a group called OWN, which was run by the students at the Gloucester University, and basically they would take over open spaces without any permission or any notice and go and just make street art. and take art out into public spaces. And we spent a few days in Stroud wrapping things in string, chalking on the floor, wrapping things in tin foil, even had street art with people wandering around and billboards and things. And it was a really fun time. We then concluded this by having an exhibition in the town hall. And that was in May of 2019. And since September of 19, I've been a volunteer at the Gas Green Community Centre, working with the Independence Trust. And we have been asked to put together a mural for the walls outside the community centre because they are looking rather tired and need brightening up. So I designed 4 mosaic panels, which myself and a group of vulnerable adults who have been prescribed art on prescription, and my mentor, Vicky Hensel-Walker, who's a ceramicist, have now proceeded to make these. And hopefully I can share my screen with you and show you some pictures. Is that going to let me do that? No, technology has thwarted me. Okay, well, I'll have to attach some pictures at a later stage. But basically, we've been making these mosaics. Sadly, it all got put on hold during March. But now we have reconvened. We're wearing PPE. We are socially distanced. We work outside. We have our own tools. We wear gloves and masks. And we're back making the mosaics. So we hope to complete the project by the end of September. And then we'll have a grand opening and install the mosaic in April of 2021. So that's something to look forward to, and I think that's a very positive thing. Also, throughout the lockdown, I've been working with the ceramic group Mospots, and again, Vicky has been delivering clay and glazes and slip to us so that we can make our work at home. A month later, she will then collect the boxes and fire the work and return the previous work. So we have an ongoing system of being able to make work at home. Every Monday, we have a group Zoom meeting so that we can all get together and discuss what we're doing, how we're feeling, inspire one another with various ideas. And we also have a WhatsApp group that is open 24 hours a day, and people just put pictures on or ask questions. And so it actually has kept the group together and kept that sort of art community going, which has been a real godsend, not only for myself, but obviously for the group as well. So that's pretty much what I can tell you about me. Hopefully I can take you for a walk and give you a guided tour of my studio, if you'd like to come with. So, don't know if you can see, these are some of my ceramics. Can you see those?
Yes. Oh,
good.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Love those greens.
And I've been currently looking at birthing trays. Apparently this is a tradition that once you successfully gave birth, you were rewarded by giving a tray. Seems a bit mean, but there you go, as long as the baby survived. And so this is an idea I've been working on and making a few of my interpretations of those. And then across here, this is my workbench, where you can see I've got a few of my images. These are the sort of the closed up and the empty void and the sort of the tangled web that we're living in. And it's all some sort of sketchbook ideas and things. So hopefully that gives you an idea of where I'm at and the sort of things that I do. And it's a brief introduction to Ali Goff World.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Really interesting. What sort of scale do you work at? Do you sort of do you sort of play with scale at all with your ceramics? Do you go very small or any bigger, or are you generally sort of working within that sort of hand kind of
Tends to be handheld for two reasons.
Yeah.
One, because obviously it's easier to work with, doesn't
Yeah.
use a lot of materials. But two, my limitations with the kiln, because
Yes.
we can only actually put in pieces up to 16 inches for the kiln. So I am kind of restricted for size-wise on that.
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
I make in pieces and then reassembled afterwards, which is something I could perhaps. But I would like to work bigger. Hopefully once I get to the studios at Hardwick, I might be able to do that.
Yeah.
I've made some miniature ceramics as well, which I've passed to Rob to put into some of his galleries. So that'll be.
Oh, that would be interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, yeah.
But no, really, it's handheld.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was just, you mentioned about the birthing trays. Was that sort of like centuries ago in England?
Century in
Was
England.
it really?
Yeah, yeah. If the women successfully gave birth and the child survived, they would present her with a tray while she was lying in, because you had to rest after you've given
Yeah,
birth.
how extraordinary.
There'd be sweetmeats and treats on this tray, and that was sort of like your congratulations, you've given birth. But obviously nowadays the new modern thing is with celebrities, they get given cars and diamonds and all sorts of things. So it's yes, it's
Yeah,
a bit wild, but I just thought
yeah.
that
How
was
interesting. Yeah, I like that. Very interesting. Thank you.
Well, Ali, in your presentation, you answered my burning question. Ali sent me a copy of her bio over the other day there for me to read, and it was all about the birthing and cycle of life issue. But the first time I ever met Ali, at university 2 years ago, she was working with the whole idea of shelter. And so I thought I'd ask this morning, how did you come about that transition from shelter through, but you sort of answered it through discussion on cocoons.
I can elaborate on that actually, because I think the reason I was working with shelter and cocoons and, you know, being contained was at that stage in my life, I was in a sort of a transient situation. I was living between two homes. We had a rented house in Oxfordshire and I was living in student halls for my first year of uni. And so I didn't have any roots. And I was kind of moving, you know, living out of bags and being sort of a nomadic existence. And I found that very unsettling and it wasn't good for me. So I think it put me in a sense of flux. And the way to deal with that emotionally was to make work about feeling, you know, a need for security, a need to be wrapped and engulfed and to feel safe and have some sort of confinement and sense of belonging. And I think now, because I am at St Paul's and I have become a member of the community and I get involved with a lot of the community activities, I have that sense of belonging and a bit more roots. And I actually have a roof over my head and things like that. So I don't have to live out of bags and move every weekend to somewhere else. And that element of security has allowed me to now look at what's actually important. And I think for me, it is family and home and security and that sort of closeness and the interaction with people. And I think that's been highlighted really strongly for me during this last 7 months, because I have spent a lot of time on my own and basically I've hated it. You know, I've needed to have people to bounce off of and to discuss ideas and, you know, just to talk to. You know, you go a bit batty talking to yourself and to the cat all day long. So I think that's highlighted that collaborative work is definitely a key thing for me, and it's a focus that I really want to continue with, because it's something I really enjoy and I probably need as well, actually, as an artist.
Thank you.